I'm Simon Foster.
Hi, I'm Patti Foster.
And we're here today to talk about authentic communications.
Welcome to the Redirect Podcast, where we explore what comes after career. Real conversations about transitioning from the 9-to-5 grind to your next great adventure. Whether you're heading into retirement or simply redefining what purpose means, we're here to inspire, inform, and help you reimagine what's next. This isn't the end of the road. It's the start of something new. Adam and Dale, today on the Redirect Podcast, we're going to talk about the empty nest. The time of life when your children have been launched, and there you are, you and your spouse, just the two of you. Doesn't that sound beautiful? I don't know what that's like because I still have a nest with a couple of birds in it. You guys are empty nesters. Why don't you share with me what that's like? Because I don't know what it is.
I've experienced it twice.
Do say.
Yeah, so I was married for the first time, 25 years, couple of boys, and launched those two nuggets into the future and into adulthood, and it was awesome. That marriage, didn't work out. So then I met a woman who I am currently married to. She is awesome. She had two girls, and one of those girls was a teenager at the time, and we launched that one. So for the second time, my nest is empty, and it is awesome. I completely love it.
So oddly enough, when we launched my two sons, Fran and I were working together already. I was CEO, she was COO of our company. Our communication was great, but it was all work focused. It was, we were talking 24/7. When I've now moved into this transition period, we've got more time to talk about more things, and we're starting to learn how to do that. So I'm so excited about hearing what you guys have done.
So let's do that. Today's friends of the Redirect Podcast are Patti and Simon Foster. Let's start by introducing Patti. Patti earned her BA in Hotel and Restaurant Management from Michigan State University, and in 1982 began her career in the hospitality industry marketing intercontinental hotels. Patti's career evolved into consulting on assessing financial feasibility for new hotel construction and acquisitions all over Europe. Upon returning to her native Cincinnati in 1999, Patti earned her law degree at the University of Cincinnati while raising 3 children, and then embarked on her second career. Patti has returned to her hospitality roots, founding Paint and Sip, a social art business featuring cookie decorating. Patti also volunteers at SCORE, a national network for free expert business mentors, where she shares insights from her business, legal, and entrepreneurial background. Simon comes to us with a 30-year career in IT program management as a consulting partner with PwC, IBM, and Deloitte. Before he traveled extensively in the hotel industry, where he met Patti, and the couple lived in Sydney, Australia, London, England, Chicago, and Cincinnati here in the U.S. After a 3-year stint as an IT director at Cintas, Simon retired in 2018. For the past 7 years, Simon has served on several boards, including treasurer of the Ohio Riverway and Crown Cincinnati, which aims to build hiking and biking paths around Cincinnati as a part of the Ohio Erie Cycle Trail Network. Simon also shares his vast business experience as a part-time consultant. Though Patti and Simon have found purpose in their retirement years, they had to confront the empty nest. Together, they had to rebuild their home relationship in day-to-day living and learn how to have an authentic conversation with one another. Patti and Simon, welcome to the Redirect Podcast.
Thank you.
So, hey, let's talk a little about your family makeup and your children. How old might they be? And this idea of being launched. How successful were you in launching them? And have they stayed launched? How long have they been launched? All of that stuff.
That's funny you should say that, because our house is very much a revolving door. And as far as you launch them, they find their way back again.
Those boomerangs come right back.
Boomerangs come right back. But no, our kids, it's been a really fun, amazing process watching them grow. We have got an almost 37-year-old daughter who lives in town with 2 kids. So we get to see a lot of her and her whole family.
Congratulations.
We have an almost 35-year-old daughter who has started a new job here in Cincinnati, Ohio. She's actually staying with us here in Cincinnati while that's happening. And then we have a son who is going to be 30 in December. We just figured that out. And he is in Denver and engaged to be married and doing amazing things.
That's exciting.
Yeah. It's good
And
fun.
so you have 2 grandkids?
2 grandkids. Yes, 3 and 1. They're
That's
maniacs. They're amazing. Yeah. So we get to see tons of them, and that has changed our household enormously. You talk about, finding authentic communication and how you rebuild a relationship with your spouse. Well, all these little satellite people that are around, depending on how much they're around, they help drive that conversation and help keep you connected to them and to the family and to the whole, the whole process.
So you have kids and grandkids like close in your orbit around you.
Yeah, we're very lucky. We see our 2 little grandchildren almost every day because they live in Cincinnati. And we get on great with Jenny's husband and the whole family, so it's fantastic. We were out with them last night for dinner, actually, at a Chinese restaurant celebrating Patti's birthday.
That is
Happy
true.
birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
They do a great job at this place. They come out with a gong and fireworks and balloons and bubbles and everything. It's fantastic.
I think today is my birthday. What is that restaurant?
Probably good, isn't it?
They don't ID you. You can pull that off every day if you want.
So this all sounds great. It's a wonderful family. So I too have a grand person in town, and love being able to see them. For you in your home, and when all of a sudden you retired, Simon, describe how that all went initially.
Well, I got a new boss, so that was,
You had gone so long without a boss.
I know. I thought I was managing the house, and it turns out I needed supervision. But no, I'm just kidding. But it is different. It's different living your life observed. You just have another human in your space, and suddenly all these little things you did every day independently are part of a conversation that someone else maybe has an opinion about or wants to sort of shift or wants to be part of. So it's just making space for that other person to now live their life in the house as well.
How did you make that space? What conversations did you have in order to sort of set the rules?
Well, let me just summarize what I did, because I think I actually did a step-down retirement, which is kind of interesting. I had a consulting job where I was traveling a lot. I was based in London, and then we were in Chicago for a while, Minneapolis, back to Cincinnati. I didn't know how stressful that was until I stopped doing it. In 2015, I stopped traveling because I was burned out, and I started a job at Cintas Corporation here in town, where I was a senior director in IT. So then I was able to go to and from work every day, which was a completely new experience for me. I'd never come home for dinner 5 days a week before in my whole career, and it was we only had one child at home at that time, my son Alex. But that was a fantastic new experience, and just thoroughly enjoyed that.
Well, yeah.
That.
As part of the house, as far as the household was concerned, this sort of felt like for many, many years we had a cast of 4 people and a visiting guest star that would show up for weekends and fun outings.
That.
And
Guest star.
I can relate to that. How about you, Dale?
I can relate to that. It was just an expectation that I would show up on the weekend, and I got to be entertainment guy. So that was really easy. So you scared the daylights, by the way, out of me when you said a new observed person in the house. And now I'm thinking about I'm being watched.
it feels
And
like
doing
that
the watching.
sometimes. I know, and it's not that you're doing anything you're ashamed of. It's just knowing that someone else is watching what you chose to eat for lunch that day, and all the little mundane decisions.
Patty, I have to compliment you on your depiction of that. That's one of the most gracious ways I think we've heard that described, as far as someone who was at home for the majority of the time. And then you have this invader. You get used to the routine of having separate professional lives or a professional life outside of your house. And when someone comes home from the workforce primarily, it can be disruptive. You're reacclimating to a different interaction, different pace. You have different things to talk about, right? You don't have the work stress, all of that stuff that you decompress over, and that becomes very routine. And I don't think I've heard anybody talk as graciously about that encounter as you described it, Patti. So that was enjoyable.
I've had a conversation with somebody that retired, very active, late in his career, and decided to walk away. He was pretty interesting in his approach in that he created a contract with his wife and said that these are the situations. On Tuesday, it's my day, and I get to do whatever I want to do on Tuesday. You cannot plan anything for me on Tuesday because that's my day. I can involve you in my day if you'd like, and you can say no. But if I'm sitting on the couch and reading a book, or I'm just sitting on the couch, it's my day. And then Thursdays are going to be our night out, and that's our date night. We're going to do those types of things. So they set up all these little boundaries. To your point, Patti, that you now have two people in this house 100% of the time where it wasn't that before. And I think that might be a little too aggressive on occasion. However, I'm curious, what were the rules that you guys set up, to the respect rules or however it is, in order to get you guys established to be in that empty nest together and smiling?
We had some rules that we had worked out earlier on. I remember when I had a project in Paris and we were living in London. That's when our son was born. And I would come home at the end of the week on a Friday and I would be just exhausted and flop. And Patti would say, that's not acceptable. She said, if you had to do a presentation right now to the board of directors, to your client, you would find that energy, and I want you to find that energy for me. And that was a...
Good for you.
I
That's
know.
Amazing.
That was life-changing because I thought, she's right. I could do that if it was my client. Why can't I do that for my wife? So we actually did have a date night when I got home from the airport, and I loved it. It was better than just slumping in front of the TV.
Yeah, we also had a rule that there was to be no complaining about how sleepless you were or the rotten food you'd been served at the restaurant or the things that had happened during the week. We didn't want to be in competition.
My fillet steak was overdone.
Exactly. I know. He would tell me that while I was eating cold macaroni and cheese over the sink. But we just kind of decided that we didn't want to be competing for who had the worst week or the least amount of sleep. We wanted to show up for each other with energy and with purpose.
Where'd you find the inspiration to do that?
Actually, probably my sister who got divorced. But before she got divorced, she and her husband, whenever we went round there, they would be competing to see who's the biggest victim. Who's having the worst time, and sort of in a downward competition. And we're like, we never want to do that.
Yeah, it was a bad example, so we decided not to follow that one.
Man, I can tell you some of the best encouragement I've had in my life about how to be a person was by watching people I didn't want to reenact or to emulate.
That's right. You always learn from people, don't you? So you learn what you do or don't want to do. It's the same at work. You think, I do not want to be like that guy.
When we first started talking about having you on the podcast, Simon, you and I had met for lunch, and you had mentioned that you and Patti had both kind of gone through fierce intimacy. Can you talk about how you found that, how you got that, and tell me about the impact that's had on you guys?
And what it is.
Fierce Intimacy is a book written by a psychologist, I believe, named Terry Real. And it was recommended to me by one of my best friends. She is a therapist and just believes wholeheartedly in a lot of the messages. And at that time, Simon and I were having trouble communicating. We were fighting. We were in the empty nest stage. We had been to a couples counselor and found that wasn't terribly helpful. We were competing more or less in counseling, trying to win over the counselor onto our side of the argument, which turns out not to be a good strategy. Don't recommend that.
It's a good waste of money.
Good waste of money. Exactly, yeah. He gets to just sit back and take his fee and just watch us like a tennis tournament. So this book actually turned that around for us. We decided we would be better off reading this sort of theoretical version of what relationships were like and what communication was like, and treating it like a book club where we would get together in a coffee shop and discuss chapters one at a time, and relate them to ourselves. But at that point, we weren't talking about our own issues and our own grievances. We were looking at how people relate to each other and trying to do better and taking lessons from that book. So it's been a really good process for us, I think.
Please tell me you actually went to a coffee shop.
We actually went to a coffee shop.
That's awesome.
Amusingly, that's one of the fears I had when I retired, is Patty's going to find out how much coffee I actually drink during the day. So Patti craved intimacy, she told me, and after we'd been to a counselor for a while, I came away and had this insight that, can you be intimate with somebody that you don't really understand? I don't always understand what Patty's thinking or why. So we tried to work on that, and Terry Reel's book, I think Fierce Intimacy, is only available on audio. So we would listen to a couple of chapters and then meet and say, well, what did you think about this? What did you think about the strategies for being right and the strategies for being wrong, which were a couple of things I remember in the book. So it was actually pretty helpful for us.
I happened to listen to the book, not in its entirety. I went through about half of it. And he brings out in the beginning, it's sort of cool, he talks about some of the features of it. And he says that you have that, and everybody's heard this fight or flight, but he adds another thing about fix. Mm-hmm. All right, so those are the three elements. He says those are our kid elements that we have in us. And how do we handle conflict? Do we fight? Do we flight? Or do we try to fix it? And it was interesting when you were sharing the conversations, like you're on the road, and I get it. I used to be that guy too, and I'd come home and energy level goes down. I'm just sitting there and I hate my life because I got to leave the next week and everything. And I start telling stories. I was out at this place. I was out at that place. Not necessarily thinking about what my wife went through as she was homeschooling our kids. And I come in there and just blow up on my week, and then she blows up on her week. And Terry gives an example of that, and that happened in his life. And then he mentions this thing about a second level of consciousness, where that when you are in that position of either fight, flight, or fix, you take a pause, and you think about the experience and say, okay, it's not about me. I need to focus on her right now. Let me help you with the kids, and then we're going to come back and have a glass of wine, and I want to hear about your day. As opposed to me coming in and going, can you believe my flight was late and all this type of stuff? And it's like just that little second level thought of consciousness really helped. And I mean, I like the Terry book. I think it's a fierce intimacy. I think it's a great little guide, and he's a very interesting.
There's a lot of good stuff.
He's a character.
I actually made notes as I went through it, and my first line reads, "I'm Flea, Patti is Fix." So that was the first thought that occurred to me as I went through that chapter.
I think this would be a good time to take a quick break. If you're enjoying our show, we'd be incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to comment. And if you like what you're hearing, leave us a 5-star review. Your feedback not only makes our day, but helps other listeners discover our content. Your support through listening, sharing, following, and reviewing means the world to us and helps our podcast grow. Thanks so much for being part of the Redirect family. So let's now get back to our conversation. You guys were talking about having done some contracting. Was this well before all of this, or
you mean counseling?
You guys had set out some contracts.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
was
that was well before? Yeah,
that was well before. So after even with those contracts in place, wasn't going to be perfect.
Well, and some of it might have been what you're describing, the empty nest syndrome, which was also complicated by Simon retiring and moving back into the house in 100% way. I mean, all of those things kind of happened at once. And Dale, unlike you, where you had a natural conversation with your wife, you described that you are still locked together in business and, in your conversations, your day-to-day, all related to each other. We didn't really have that. We were coming from two separate worlds into this house and having to find that conversation, find where we overlapped, where we still wanted to be independent, and just navigating all of those issues, I think. And some of that, I think, Simon When I say I got a new boss, I'm not completely joking. Simon was used to being the boss of his world most of the day, most of every day. And that was a challenging person to talk to sometimes, a challenging dynamic to feel like he was looking around for the person that he was now managing, and that person was me. So.
And based on your willingness to step up and say, hey, this action, this previous behavior, the way you came home, and you would show up differently for a presentation, your personality type to be able to assert yourself and say, hey, that's not acceptable. Is it fair to say that when the new boss shows up, that's not just peacefully coexisting, that was an opportunity for friction?
Well, it absolutely can be. And there's a quote that I just read in a different book we're now reading, which is called Whole Brain Living, where the author says, we are feeling creatures who think, not thinking creatures who feel. And I think that's so profound because you always lead with emotions. Emotion is the first thing that happens. And Terry Real makes the point that at the very top of the flowchart, at the very top of the decision tree, you got to decide, do I want to stay with this person or not? If I'm going to stay with this person, we need to work on enjoying ourselves more and having a more fulfilling relationship. If I'm not going to stay with this person, fine, walk away. But, obviously we both made the commitment. We're going to stay together and we're going to work on this and we're going to improve our relationship and make it more fulfilling and enjoyable. And I think we have gone some way towards that. But you never get perfection.
It's a journey.
And that's one of the things I learned from Terry Real that I really appreciated. He's got, I think, a 70% rule. If someone apologizes, 70% right, accept their apology. If someone says something, 70% right, don't go for the 100%. I think I'm very guilty of wanting the 100%. And that's been a good lesson. I also want to be generous to Simon because I'm not the only person who got a new boss in this situation. I've got a perfectly strong personality, and when he moved into the house, he also found that maybe for the first time he had someone who had a strong opinion about what he did on a Tuesday night or what we should have for dinner or do it this way, don't do it that way. And that's probably not what he was used to hearing in his professional world. So he also had a new boss at the same time.
Well, as I mentioned, my wife was our COO of the company that we had.
Oh, so she was literally the boss.
Yeah, she basically ran the business. I was out there just building it, to be blunt. That's really the way it happened. But what I found was when I came back and she ran the house, so I felt I was like in her territory. And I'm the guy now in transition because I'm early. It's only been a couple months since I decided to start my next 30. I'm now in this place. She's been the leader of that, and I feel like she's the boss. And as you mentioned, a life observed. I'm thinking and watching, what am I doing? Is this disrupting what's been working really well for her? I'm in her domain.
Yeah, that's right. You're in her territory.
I am in her territory now. If all of a sudden something happens and I'm not happy about it, what's the process? How do you deal with it?
Conflict is a fact of life. And I do think that conflict can cause conflict between us. Simon would love to live in a world with no conflict. And just the mere fact of conflict sometimes is what he finds so unacceptable. So just knowing that there's going to be conflict, I think, is step one. There is actually a process that we learned in this book called the feedback wheel, where he gives you a formula for, you say 2 sentences about this, and then you say 2 sentences about how it made you feel, and 2 sentences about what you want someone to do about it. And it's very formulaic. And I think the most helpful advice he gives with that formula is that when someone approaches you and says, I have an issue I'd like to bring to your attention, your job is 100% listener at that point. You're not supposed to be rebutting, even in your head, even silently as the person's talking. You're supposed to be gracious and even set objective fact aside, because what you're really interested in is what is their experience, what are they telling me right now, what can I do as a loving partner to make them feel better about it. So that role of not, yeah, but what about, it's, I think, extremely helpful if you can remember to do it in real time.
Yeah.
Not always easy.
Help me here, Simon.
Yep. I think that's right. I think for me, I've got to keep the emotional level down because I tend to go straight to indignation. I'm like, what the hell? But I think if you can get the indignation down and actually talk about the issue at hand, the thing to avoid doing is to throw everything in the pot, because the temptation to say, oh, well, you always do that. You always do. And the next thing, you've got your whole relationship on the line over whether you took the trash out or not. And that's not, talk about the issue at hand. And then later, maybe in the coffee shop, a few days later, you can talk about, well, you always do such and such. It's a risky place to go, though, because some things about your partner you can't change. You've got to learn how you're going to live with them, not try and change them.
Yeah, rarely do things live in the absolute. Right. Mm-hmm. It's a misnomer to suggest you always do this or you never do that or that you live in those extremes. That is not reality. That's a convenient word play to emphasize your point, but that's not really reality.
No, but Adam, try pointing that out in the moment. Actually, you're factually wrong about that. It's not always, it's timing.
That's right.
pick your moment.
Right.
They always say that communication is the most important thing that you have to do. Life, at work, and especially in the empty nest. Now, you made a comment earlier, Simon, about authentic conversations. Would you like to explain that concept?
Yeah, I think there have been a few occasions where I shut down or I try to bite my tongue because I don't want to escalate. And in doing so, I'm not actually explaining my position very well to Patti, so she has less tools with which to understand what I'm thinking. So I do feel like sometimes, even if it's difficult, because as Patti's mentioned, I'm averse to conflict, sometimes it's difficult, but I have to say, no, this is what I'm actually thinking right now. So I do feel like sometimes that's appropriate, even though you've got to pick the right time, because otherwise the emotional level spirals up. But I do think if we can be authentic with one another, we have a better opportunity to try and resolve whatever the conflict is.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. For me, I find that authenticity is showing up with my full self, like knowing that I'm going to be wrong a lot. I'm going to be annoying a lot. I'm going to say the wrong thing. And
No, never.
being willing to accept that and still not try and polish it, not show up with what I think Simon wants to hear, but show up with what I think I mean to say, and then be a really good listener and try and hear what he's going to say as well.
But then there has to be some form of honesty in authenticity. And if it's not overt honesty with the person you're talking to, it's internal honesty. Like, hey, I have to be honest with myself. Mm-hmm. And if I'm going to come to this conversation authentically, then this is how I actually feel. I'm not just spun up on my own emotions. I actually feel fill in the blank, and focus on that. That's what I think. That's how I feel, and be authentic about that to yourself. Am I talking in circles here? Does that make sense? Does it complement your context of authentic communication?
I love that. I think it makes perfect sense, because it's true. If you don't know what you feel, if you don't know what you want, you're going to be in a spiral for ages. Yeah, it's like if you know what you want, it's a whole lot easier to decide how do I communicate that.
Could I take a minute to quote from the book?
Please.
Because Terry Real has 5 winning strategies, which he also has 5 losing strategies, by the way, which we all do. His 5 winning strategies are, number 1, go after what you want. So even if you rock the boat, you need to go after what you want, reward your partner's efforts. Number 2, speak to make things better. I think that's one of his, that's what we were really just talking about. Speak to make things better. 3 is listen to understand. Number 4 is respond with generosity. And number 5 is cherish what you have. I think these are pretty good rules to live by if you can remember them.
That needs to be a poster in my house.
Yeah,
Sincerely.
Stitch it on a pillow. Yeah.
And he saves that for the very end of the book, which I sometimes would want to talk to his editor and say, maybe lead with those. Because if you start with those, it is true that you probably find a lot of the conflicts that you're working through evaporate when you cherish what you have, when you put things into perspective.
That's the cliffhanger, right? That's trying to get people to the end so that they don't stop reading after that chapter.
How can you communicate with love and respect even when you argue?
I would say that is the one of the biggest challenges
Oh, yeah.
in any relationship, certainly ours. And I think we're not there yet. I think that's something that we're still working on. How do you disagree respectfully with somebody when they take an opposing point of view? And I think it's something that is not easy. So I don't have a good answer. We're not experts in this at all.
Well, I think some of it might be the pause that you mentioned. That's one of the strategies that this book talks about as well. He talks about it as the whoosh, which is that moment when you just unbridle yourself and have at it. And he says, try to avoid the whoosh. When you feel that, try not to go into the flee or the fix or the flight or the fight, but take a breath, ground yourself, try to avoid that moment.
For me, I need some kind of timeout. They say that the chemicals that cause anger and emotion in your brain will flush out after 90 seconds. If you can take, that's the whoosh, if you can take 1.5 minutes, you can regain control, because you are unable to think clearly if your amygdala is reacting with emotion. You've got to get that logic part of your brain working again, and it needs to stop panicking and settle down before you can do that.
In my business, where we were talking about creating spaces based on neuroscience, that is one of the most important things, because I, as a person who is loaded up with dopamine, it'll all come out. And all of a sudden, I'll start regretting everything that's rolling out of my mouth. If I had stopped and thought anything about one book that I loved that our old dear friend Jerry Rushing had brought forth was 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So many of these strategies, I think, emanate from way back in the 80s book that says, stop, listen, consider, listen empathically. If you ever do stop, but I do, on top of all that, I want to go back to one thing that I think you said that I want to underline for everybody. When I had to write the speech for my parents' 60th wedding anniversary, and I went back and looked, what are the elements from people who have been married for 50 or more years? Is there a consistency? Is there one thing? One of the top one was the D word was never considered. And I think for a lot of people, fear that a D word might be drifting in is something that would stop fierce intimacy. That would stop communication, I think.
You're talking about threatening divorce, is that what you're saying?
Just the fact that it could be out there.
Yeah.
The fact that it could be, if you have in the mindset of no matter what, we're working through this and we're not going anywhere. And that was the number one reason why people stuck together, is that fear of losing that person was never there.
Yeah, that's probably important. They don't do that in Hollywood. They just get divorced.
Right.
Yeah, but that was one of our rules. You talked about the rules and the contracts that we formed, and that was one of our contracts that I actually said, if the D word is even introduced, I'm going to take it extremely seriously. I'm going to act on it. So if you don't mean it, don't say it. That changed
That's
some of our
really powerful.
conversation. Yeah.
Really powerful.
I'm a flea guy.
FLEA.
Yeah, I mean, he's an incredible bassist. He really is. Different, but incredible. No, I'm a flight guy. My wife has a story, and it's so true. When we were newly married, I hold things in. I grew up in an environment where my mom was very strong, and my father, unfortunately, didn't necessarily have the opportunity to speak his mind. And then he got quiet, and I learned from that.
Kurt, I'm right there with you.
Yeah. And I always thought that was the best way to go. It frustrated the heck out of my wife. Mm-hmm. And there were times that we had conversations, and I'd just like, zipper, and I'd just like, stop.
Shut
and
down.
I'd walk away, and she would follow me. No, we're talking about this. We're talking about this now. Both of them are looking at one another and just nodding their heads, so I'm not alone. But so that's one thing. That's a frustration for her. And then the next part of it is that I find that I get upset on the little things, but there's really something deeper. But I use the little thing in order to create an issue. But what it created in me was I took this approach of like, it doesn't matter because it's a trivial thing. And why would I let a trivial thing impact something as opposed to saying, this is what's really bothering me. And that's why I still have very much of a difficulty. And maybe it's just me, and I'm asking for affirmation from you guys as well as Adam and Dale. Do we get defensive
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, all that you just described, for a minute, if I closed my eyes and if you had a British accent, I would have assumed.
Well, I can actually do British accent if you'd like me to.
No, don't do it. Don't do it. You don't do it as well as you think.
Please don't.
The Brits hate it when we do that.
Especially poorly.
We could take a good example from Patti's parents, who never argue. But I did overhear a conversation between them once, which was when they were having a tiny conflict about something absolutely minute, about where to go for dinner or something. And my father-in-law took my mother-in-law to one side and quietly said to her, "I don't think we're really having a debate about that. What's really going on?" And I was so impressed with that.
That's
I thought, I wish I could be
skillful.
as masterful as that.
That is so skillful.
He's good. He's really good. Yeah. So, but that version of like, what are we fighting about? I feel like we've fallen into that trap over and over. It's like, are we really fighting about whether you were 10 minutes late for something? Or are we fighting about the fact that I feel like you must not value me enough to show up on time? Are we fighting about the trivial, or are we fighting about the overall, how we feel about that? And we sometimes can't figure out what we're fighting about, and then we fight about that.
But I think something you said, Kurt, and it's coming up again. You said small things like come up, and then you bury it when there's a bigger thing.
I bury the bigger thing, but I
Bury
use
the bigger
a small
thing, right.
in order to.
So you don't have a way to bring that bigger thing to surface.
That is 100% correct, Dale.
So I think it's true to say that all couples fight, but to come back more to the specifics on this podcast, I think that what we're talking about is adjustment in your relationship. When you change jobs or when you have children, your marriage changes and shifts, and you've now got other people to consider in your marriage, and then when they leave home, you've got another adjustment, because now you're much more focused on one another. And if one of the spouses has been out to work solidly for decades and then suddenly is sitting around the house, that's probably one of the biggest adjustments that you've got to make since you got married in the first place.
The idea that we started this conversation talking about an empty nest, and then we had a moment about a book relevant to intimacy, communication, and then we spent a long time talking about conflict. I wonder if those dots all connect to each other, right? That you end up with an empty nest, and if you're not skillful at navigating conflict, that is going to be present with you because you have all of this time together. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and you don't get much credit for doing your own laundry, it turns out.
Wow.
Oh,
Wow.
Dale's doing a victory dance.
I found out there's a whole other machine. There's one that does dishes, and there's a whole other machine in a different room that does clothes.
I learned a long time ago in another men's group that I was in that we had one rule where you got up and you made the bed and you did not ask for kudos for doing it. You just did it.
Yes.
And that was a big adjustment.
So I want to move forward. That was a great little summary there, Adam, as far as the progression that we've gone. So let's get back to the empty nest years. Mm-hmm. You're done with your careers. Mm-hmm. Now you're figuring out the people that are there. Now the relationship is starting to happen. What did you guys do in order to move into the next thing that was your thing versus you bringing home what you did and you bringing home what you did? What was that next venture that you had a conversation about to embark on?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure that we have become more bonded in any one specific activity or interest that's taken over for our conversations. Like, we love going out to dinner together. We love going to movies together. During the daytime, we still pretty much live independent lives. Simon's on various boards, and he's a very, very busy retired person who is never worried about what his purpose is. I think he's clear on that.
Well, I keep myself busy. If there's nothing to do, I'll repair something, and if there's nothing to repair, I'll dismantle something.
Only to repair it again.
Keep myself busy.
But are the activities that you are involved with in your retirement world, they're just exclusively to your own, or are there interests that you both have, like you're cycling and you know how to ride a bike, but you're not engaged as far as how Simon
no.
is.
Or do you know how to ride a bike?
I do. I've got a really fantastic bike. But no, he goes off with the group of friends,
Okay.
the No Name Bike Club, and they just have amazing times and overnight adventures and things, and that's very much his terrain. I've got friends in places where I travel and things that I do that are completely independent of Simon. But then most evenings we figure out what we're doing together, and that usually involves theater or
And we travel together.
we
love-
travel together.
There's nothing I love more than traveling with Patti. We've booked a trip to Australia for later this year, which is going to be great.
So
Because we lived there when we were very first married. That's the first place we were together.
I think it's important that you have your own things.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's healthy.
I do. I agree with you because it's something that you want to do. You want to be engaged with. It's your focus. It may not be Patty's, but if it is, then fine. She could probably be a part of it, I would imagine. But it is also nice to have that separate time. And when you're away, then you're like, oh, my house is now my castle again, right?
I'm unobserved. Oh my God.
I was talking to my brother about this last week when I was in England. He says he could never do something separate from his wife because I said, well, look, you could come over and visit, and if your wife doesn't want to come, then just come by yourself. He said I could never do that. I could never do anything separate from her, and I think that's a shame. I think it's a healthier relationship if you can allow each other the freedom to develop your own interests and do the things that fulfill you while still being in a partnership.
And I have one question, being the only guy here of Adam and Dale that still has birds in the nest. Now you had the empty nest, and now you have one of your kids that came back. Did you have to make another adjustment for that, or are you very cool with where you're going and having an adult child? You sort of said, this is what we do, and now you have 3 separate entities working there, or has the dynamic changed a little bit?
It's changed a little bit, but very little, I would say.
She is a very easy person to have as a house guest. She just looks after herself, and we don't mind having her around at all.
But it is true. We have 3 little independent entities. We sometimes have to figure out who's working in the office today and who's taking their stuff elsewhere. But other than that, it's pretty seamus.
Do you have to go to the coffee shop with her?
We have not yet had to go to the coffee shop with her. No, take her out.
The woodshed.
But it does change the dynamic. Just having any other person as part of a conversation or knowing that your conversations are being overheard by any other person, it changes the dynamic.
So what advice would you give to people who are approaching an empty nest with 2 people mostly at home? What advice would you give people who are about to find themselves in that circumstance?
I would tell them to start a 2-person book club. It really has been, I think, interesting and fun and also helpful to find a book. It doesn't have to be about relationships.
I'm so doing that. That's such a wonderful idea.
Awesome. That's
Yeah.
a great idea.
And it doesn't have to be about relationships. It could be about anything. But just finding that common ground, something you're both interested in that you can talk around. And in our case, it was very relevant to what we were going through. So, yeah, loved it. And we keep doing that. We're not just sticking with the one and done book club. We have new books that we raise, and then we go back to the coffee shop and have a book club.
And that works for us, but I mean, let's be honest, we are not experts in any way. I don't want us to be seen as having all the answers on this kind of thing.
But man, what a brilliant way to create conversation, to create common means of connection. What a great way to connect. And the idea that you don't just do that in your living room or your own kitchen, you take that to the coffee shop is so rich and real.
You know, that empty nest, it starts out when your kids go off to college and you're still engaged in your career. That's one thing. Mm-hmm. But then when you have that empty nest, that you don't have that career that you used to, that took up a lot of your time, it's a challenge. And I've talked to my wife numerous times about that. Since we still have people living at home with us, we have to make a deliberate effort to date, to find new things that we want to do jointly, and to take interest in what each other is doing, to have those conversation points, because when that nest becomes empty, you don't want to look across the table and go, who are you? And what do we have in common?
Are you still here?
Are you going to be here tomorrow?
And the next day?
I think, though, Kurt, you're always a parent. As soon as you've had a child, you're a parent for the rest of your life, even when they become parents, and then you have to try to try not to parent them being parents. So there was one thing I thought that occurred to me earlier on. We're talking about the empty nest and your spouse coming home to work. I do think a lot of people might relate to this during COVID, because many people for the first time actually saw their spouse on Zoom calls. And I overheard somebody saying, I didn't realize my husband was one of the guys who says, hey, buddy, it is what it is. But he's that kind of guy. I didn't know that until I heard him on Zoom calls every day. So yeah, I think a lot of people had to make that adjustment during the pandemic.
COVID gave us something that I don't think we realize until you retire and you get time on your hands. You have time that you didn't have before. I wasn't standing in lines at the TSA. I wasn't wasting time traveling. And that gift that really made people think hard about their home situation.
That's an excellent point.
And I think there's some interesting stats about that starting, COVID was March of 20. Starting at about September or December of 20, divorce rates started to go up.
Oh, did they? Yeah.
They did, because people weren't equipped. And so this is a very applicable topic for that little nuance that, hey, you have a situation, if you're about to retire, you have a situation coming, be prepared for it, equip yourself for it, and set yourself up for success.
And Adam, to that point, and I read it in a Psychology Today article, that one of the cons of the empty nest syndrome is marital strain. Mm-hmm. And 40% of couples divorce because of an empty nest scenario.
Well, I want to really thank you guys for being here today, and we may be asking you back, because this is a topic that you guys have obviously lived through. Work in progress.
Well, if we show up with our attorneys, you'll know there's been a problem.
Separately, you show up in separate cars.
We're gonna keep having our own challenges. So we're just looking for people to help us. That's what this is about. But we just want to thank you so much for joining us, and learned a ton today, and I would love to have you back. So thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
And I appreciate your vulnerability in coming out here and telling us your life, parts of your life and how that impacted. I learned a lot, and I'm going to continue to listen to Terry Reel's book. Thank you so much. This was a great visit today, and I learned some neat things from you guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us. It was fun.
And thanks for joining us on the Redirect Podcast. Big thanks to the University of Cincinnati's 1819 Innovation Hub for allowing us to use the eSports recording studio to record today's podcast. Catch up on all the Redirect Podcast episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. To begin your Redirect journey, head over to redirect-u.com. Want to connect with the Redirect team? Feel free to email us at info@redirect-u.com. Remember, there's purpose in your life, so find it and go do something about it.